Hi everyone, DKeys here with an updated Staff Elementalist build guide following the release of the Hardened Thorns expansion. While the Tempest Elite specialization doesn't really do a lot for Scepter Hammer builds, and adds DPS to dagger builds only through Overload Air, Staff Elementalist gains a lot from Tempest. The new rotations that include overloads can put out around 25k DPS over a 20 to 25 second time frame, and still maintain great DPS after that. Note that overloads are very risky to use, and interrupting the channel to dodge or due to eating an attack is not a DPS gain. But if you can pull it off, it's very rewarding damage. The traits in Fire and Air really haven't changed a whole lot. In Fire, Burning Precision will add just a little bit of burning damage to your rotation, and will help maintain burning uptime for the 10% damage modifier from Burning Rage. Pyromancer's training is really strong because you'll spend a good portion of your time in Fire, but not all the time, so that's a 10% damage modifier on most of your damage and a recharge reduction to your hard-hitting skills such as Lava Font and Meteor Shower. Finally, Persisting Flames extends the duration of your fire fields and also enables your blast finishers to apply fury to yourself and your nearby allies. Now this is not as huge to party utility now that Revenants are out, and Revenants are very strong, so you will probably be seeing a lot of them in parties, but this can still help in solo situations when roaming in open world or also in less than optimal parties. In Air, Ferocious Winds is still your best bet for that 7% of your precision that you gain as a bonus to your ferocity as well. At the Master level, your two options are still Inscriptions for that recharge reduction on your glyph, or Tempest Defense, which actually sees some decent uptime, not great, but decent, due to the advent of break bars. So it really is a personal preference between these two. And also, if you're mainly fighting very short fights, you'll probably see more use out of Inscription because you'll be going from fight to fight quickly. While in moderate fights, you might see more use out of Tempest Defense if you can get a second break on that break bar. And in long fights, you will probably see benefit from both of these traits, so at that point it really is up to you. Weak Spot will give you a little bit of vulnerability generation with that 60% chance to apply Vuln on crit, but with NGs coming back into the meta and Revenants, again, this isn't as big of a deal for you anymore. And finally, Bolt to the Heart is still a great trait as a 20% damage modifier to foes under 50% health. Now the new part is adding Tempest. Taking Tempest gives you access to overloads, which are mostly pretty strong skills, especially Overload Fire and Overload Air. Overload Earth also has some usefulness as well with that Cripple and Immob. At the Adept level, I've really started liking Gal Song, which will trigger Eye of the Storm, which is a stun break every 40 seconds if you have a stun applied to you. This has saved my life more than a few times when exploring the new maps for Heart of Thorns. So I think that's great to use, at least in that case, and also in fractals when you have to deal with knockdowns. If you don't want to take that trait, Latent Stamina is useful for some extra dodges in some situations when you know you won't be seeing any sort of CC on yourself. Then finally, Unstable Conduit, while it seems really nice in theory because of those extra auras, you won't really see a lot of exceptional utility from the skill. It's still useful, it still pairs great with Elemental Bastion for that extra bit of healing, but I feel like it is not nearly as important to staying alive in those difficult situations as Gal Song. Speedy Conduit gives you swiftness when you're overloading an attunement, so that will maintain very good swiftness uptime with these rotations. And then Harmonious Conduit is a 10% damage modifier for 5 seconds after successfully completing an overload, and also gives you some stability while channeling that overload so you're less likely to be interrupted. Your other options here, Invigorating Torrents, which is another aura skill, and Tempestuous Aria, which will buff your shouts, are kind of subpar alternatives to Harmonious Conduit for this kind of build, though I would say the whole Tempest trait line has a lot going for auras if that's your thing. Finally, Hardy Conduit not only gives you some prot while overloading an attunement, but also increases the effectiveness of that prot on you, so you are a little bit tankier when you need it the most. Finally, at the Grandmaster tier, Imbued Maladies is your standard Warhorn trait, which will increase boon duration, and also has a little bit of a side effect with Sand Squall, but since this is a staff build and not a Warhorn build, it doesn't really give you much use. Lucid Singularity is my choice for this particular build because, again, it makes it even more difficult for you to be interrupted or bursted down when using your overloads, because you maintain a lot of resistance to those conditions that will get you stuck in sticky situations. Then finally, Elemental Bastion, which I touched on before, isn't a bad choice, but since you won't be applying a lot of auras with this particular build, isn't exactly the best synergy for this build, though again, it pairs very well with Unstable Conduit. For gear, since you're still using Ferocious Winds in this build, I would recommend full Assassin's Armor and Assassin's Trinkets where available, with the rest Berserker Trinkets and a Berserker Weapon. This will give you just over a 100% crit chance once you apply banners, food, and Signet of Fire, but it is what will maximize your stat point usefulness. For runes, I recommend Scholar Runes still, or if you can't afford Scholar Runes or feel like you don't get very good uptime, Flame Legion Runes. And then Air and Force Sigils on your staff for daytime, and Night and Force for nighttime, as well as Slaying and Force for any dungeons you do frequently. Now, if you happen to use this kind of loadout, I would recommend Power Infusions, though if you happen to have Precise Infusions still laying around, you can easily swap something out from Assassins to Berserkers. Now, you may want to just go with a full suggested loadout so that you can maximize the amount of agony resistance you have on your items, which I'm still in the process of doing. Now note that Staff Elementalist, while it puts out a ton of damage, isn't exactly the best choice for super high level fractals, both due to its glassiness as well as the fact that it's primarily direct damage. And with the toughness scaling of fractals right now, you'll still feel it on your Elementalist. And also, if you ever happen to have a ranger in the party, the easiest way to adjust for that is to just swap Signet of Fire out for something else that does damage, such as Arcane Wave. For food, I would usually recommend truffle steak for your most optimal food, or if you want something that's a slightly more budget-friendly alternative, steak and asparagus is great, as well as food from your birthday blaster. While asparagus and sage salad or seaweed salad are decent options, since you are rooted while using, say, Frostbow or Meteor Shower, you won't always have that 8 or 10% damage modifier. Also, for challenging content, you might want lifesteal food. I would recommend using slaying potions whenever they're available, or if they're not available, sharpening stones are a very solid alternative, and if you want the best in slot, I would go with bountiful sharpening stones for an elementalist. If you don't want to use sharpening stones, then Scalvenom is another alternative, though if you happen to have some attack that bounces back to you, not necessarily in a staff elementalist, but say Dagger Focus, you have a chance of having that negative effect being applied to yourself. Also, any other kind of utilities you pick up along the way that just make your life easier are always great to have around. Your slot skills really haven't changed all that much for the Elementalist build either. Again, Arcane Brilliance is a great melee heal that also is a blast finisher. Though if you need more condition removal, especially for some of those fractal instabilities, Heat through Renewal is not a bad option. Your staples for your offensive slot skills are Signet of Fire, Conjure Frostbow, and Glyph of Storms, particularly to use in air attunement. Though if you don't want to use Frostbow, Arcane Wave is always a solid choice. Other utilities that you might put on your bar for some circumstances include Glyph of Elemental Power for that CC from the effect when cast in water or in earth, which will then carry on to your other attunements. Glyph of Renewal if you have allies that happen to get down more frequently than you do. Mist Form for getting out of sticky situations, as well as Lightning Flash for that. Or one of my favorites is Arcane Shield, which will help me get an Overload or Meteor Shower off safely. For the shouts, none of them are really that great. I mean, Eye of the Storm is great in its use as a trait, but I don't know if having it on your bar is any better than some of your other options. And Aftershock can be really nice for that magnetic aura for you and your party mates, but it has a pretty long cooldown. Feel the Burn, really, I mean, it's about on the same level as using Arcane Wave, which Arcane Wave's a blast finisher, or Arcane Blast, which is a heck of a lot better damage than the Shout. For your elite, Rebound's a great option, especially for difficult content, or for when you're just running around solo and might try to tackle a skill point that might be a little bit out of your league. Of course, Conjuring Fiery Greatsword is great for using as a running skill, or as an alternative to using fireballs between lava fonts. And Rocky will never go out of style, he's still great. Though instead of taking the Ice Elemental for heals, I would recommend taking Rebound instead. Staff rotations got a lot more interesting with this patch. The concept is to use skills with long channels, such as Meteor Shower or Frostbow, to enable you to be in air attunement while minimizing the amount of auto-attacking you do. If you have Frostbow on your bar, you want to start with Glyph of Storms and Air Attunement and follow up with Overload Air, then immediately swap to Fire and drop Lava Font, Meteor Shower, and Lava Font again. Then Overload Fire will be off cooldown, so you'll want to use that next, and follow that up with another Lava Font as well. Then Auto Attack with 3 Fireballs, and then another Lava Font, Fireballs, and Lava Font yet again, and then Conjure Frostbow while swapping to Air Attunement. Use Frostbow 4, 3, and as much of 2 as you need until Overload Air is off cooldown. Then use Overload Air, drop your Frostbow, and go back to Fire to repeat that cycle. When your Glyph of Storms is off cooldown, work that into the air portion of your rotation as well, so that will probably minimize your need to use Frostbow 2 as a DPS gap filler, as it's your best choice and it's really not that great of a choice. Also, if you have Fiery Greatsword and plan to use that for DPS, you can use Fiery Greatsword 5, a targeted 4, and 3 on a large hitbox instead of some fireballs. Then again, drop that Fiery Greatsword and get your Lava Font down as soon as possible. If you don't have Frostbow on your bar, you use a similar rotation, but instead of using Frostbow to cover your time in Air Attunement, you want to use Meteor Shower instead. It slows down your burst a little bit since you're waiting for the Meteor Shower cooldown, but it doesn't have that big of an effect on your overall DPS. So you'll basically cast Meteor Shower once after your initial air burst, wait for it to come off cooldown again, and then use that while swapping to Air Attunement, and then auto attack at air until Overload Air is off cooldown. And of course, if Glyph of Storms is off cooldown, use that instead of auto attacking. Other skills you'll want to be aware of, especially because of their usefulness against break bars, are Frozen Ground in Water Attunement, Gust in Static Field in Air, and Unsteady Ground in Shockwave in Earth. Now Frostbow 5 isn't actually that effective against break bars, and so you don't want to save that for its particular CC, which is pretty different than what we're used to. Anyway, I've had a lot of fun getting to play around with Tempest and getting to learn its traits a little bit better, and I'm really happy that they haven't nerfed Overload Fire or Overload Air yet. Thanks for watching the guide, and I hope you guys are also having a lot of fun with Tempest. Thanks for watching!